In 1965, if you wanted to haul a family across the Alps, you bought a radiator-leaking sedan that would likely leave you stranded. Then, Volkswagen launched the Type 3 variant. With a pathetic 40 horsepower, it looked like a joke. But underneath sat a pancake engine so radical. It secretly made the world-famous Beetle obsolete and redefined what a wagon could do. In the mid-1960s, Volkswagen was the prisoner of its own success. The Beetle was a global phenomenon, a car so ubiquitous that it had ceased to be a mere vehicle and had become a lifestyle, a cultural manifesto, and a template for simple, reliable transport. Yet, behind the closed doors of the Wolfsburg boardroom, there was an existential crisis. The engineers knew that the Beetle was a technical dead end. It was a claustrophobic penalty box. It offered almost no cargo capacity. The engine was a vertical lump of iron that turned the back of the car into an inaccessible well, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to convince a growing, affluent middle class that they should endure such spatial limitations for the sake of the VW badge. Volkswagen needed an evolution, but they were handcuffed by their own identity. They had staked their reputation on the rear-mounted, air-cooled, flat-four architecture. It was the unkillable core of their existence. To move to a front-engine, water-cooled design would have been a public admission of defeat in admission that the Beetle was flawed. So, they did the only thing a company driven by engineering arrogance could do. They decided to force the impossible into reality. They set out to build a car that looked like a traditional wagon, but packed the secret DNA of a space-efficient revolution. They created the Type 3. And in doing so, they didn't just build a better car, they effectively started a quiet war to make the Beetle obsolete. The Type 3 problem was simple on paper, but an absolute nightmare in the workshop. How do you build a practical family wagon when your engine, by law of the company, must be at the rear and air-cooled? In a standard Beetle, the cooling fan and the oil cooler were mounted vertically, sitting like a tombstone atop the engine. This forced the rear cargo area to be shaped like a narrow, deep cavern, limiting what you could carry. The engineers, led by the masters of the flat configuration, decided to stop fighting the architecture and start manipulating it. They realized that the height of the engine was dictated by the peripherals, not the cylinders themselves. By taking the cooling fan and the oil cooler, which usually dominated the vertical space, and relocating them to the back of the engine bay, they pulled off one of the greatest engineering sleights of hand of the 20th century. They essentially flattened the power plant. The resulting pancake engine was a masterpiece of lateral thinking. It was a defiant FU to the conventions of the era. They didn't just shrink the engine, they forced it beneath the floor of the cargo area. The result was the Squareback. For the first time, a Volkswagen owner had a flat, expansive, usable cargo floor. But they didn't stop there. Because the engine was now tucked away at the very rear, they retained the traditional front frunk. Suddenly, the humble VW was a two-story storage powerhouse. It was an engineering triumph of compression, proving that you didn't need to bloat the car's exterior dimensions to gain a massive increase in utility. They kept the bulletproof, simple, air-cooled design, but condensed it into a package that made the Beetle look like a top-heavy toy. By 1965, the European automotive market was dominated by the heavy hitters. If you were a family in the Ruhr Valley looking to spend your summer on the French Riviera, you bought a Ford Cortina or a Peugeot 404. You bought a car with a radiator, a water pump, a thermostat, and a sense of proper engineering. To the average commuter, the Type 3 variant, with its measly 40 horsepower, looked like a joke, a comically underpowered grocery getter destined to be the slow-moving roadblock of the Alps. But this was where Volkswagen's secret came into play. They weren't building for the drag strip, they were building for the endurance trial. Imagine the Stelvio Pass in 1966. It is a grueling, winding ribbon of asphalt that punishes the weak. In the 1960s, this was a graveyard for advanced water-cooled cars. You would see them stranded on the side of the road, hoods popped, steam billowing into the thin mountain air, owners frantically pouring water into boiling radiators. Then there is the variant. Packed to the roof with luggage, 4 passengers, and a week's worth of camping gear, It crawls up the incline. It is a loud, vibrating, visceral experience. The cabin smells of warm oil and the rhythmic metallic ticking of air-cooled cylinders. It is a machine that demands participation. There is no power steering to isolate you, no automatic gearbox to take the decision-making away from the driver. To conquer the pass, the driver had to be a master of momentum. You had to read the terrain, anticipate the hairpin, and row through the 4-speed gearbox with surgical precision to keep the tiny engine in its peak power band. This wasn't a chore. It was a meditative endurance test. Because the car lacked the power to blast past the scenery, it forced families to see it. It turned the transcontinental crossing into a shared, high-stakes human experience. While the owners of the luxurious sedans were fuming over a burst rubber hose or a stuck thermostat, the variant driver was cruising in a mobile living room that simply refused to stop. The Type 3 wasn't just a car, it was a mechanical cockroach. It proved that in the middle of a French summer, 500 miles from home, the only engineering metric that truly mattered was dependability. Before the Type 3, the Grand Vacation was a social barrier. It was the exclusive domain of the wealthy people who could afford heavy, thirsty, high-maintenance cruisers. The middle class was anchored to their hometowns, limited by the fear that their city car wouldn't survive the crossing. The variant shattered those chains. It acted as the ultimate chariot for the post-war family, turning the world into a vast, accessible backyard. It fueled the growth of the modern campsite culture. Suddenly, a family from Germany could pack their entire life into the back of a Squareback, drive across international borders, and arrive in Italy with nothing more than a bit of dirt on the floor mats and a few miles of oil on the dipstick. It changed the social fabric of Europe. When you can load your life into a car and reliably cross a continent, the world feels smaller. The variant didn't just carry luggage, it carried the aspirations of a generation. It democratized the freedom to explore, proving that you didn't need to be rich to be a traveler, you just needed a machine that was honest. This was a psychological win as much as a mechanical one. Because the engine was so simple, it fostered a unique bond between the owner and the machine. You didn't need a certified factory technician to troubleshoot a mysterious cooling failure. A basic set of wrenches, a spare fan belt, and a little common sense were enough to handle almost anything the road could throw at you. It turned the average father into a roadside mechanic, and those repair sessions in quiet, scenic laybys became the lure of the road trip. It was a partnership of trust. By the late 1960s, the automotive establishment had settled into a comfortable narrative. The Type 3 was a reliable, but decidedly old-school tool. It was the wagon for the conservative father who didn't care about performance. Volkswagen, however, had one more card to play. In 1968, they introduced the Bosch D-Jetronic electronic fuel injection in a family wagon. For the rest of the industry, this was equivalent to finding a spacecraft in a barn. While manufacturers like Ford and Peugeot were still struggling with the finicky maintenance of dual carburetors, manual chokes, and the constant need for tuning, Volkswagen had quietly installed a digital brain. The D-Jetronic system was taking constant, real-time measurements of air density, engine temperature, and load, adjusting fuel delivery with a level of precision that the industry wouldn't fully adopt for another decade. This was the secret engineering that defined the Type 3's later years. To the casual observer, it looked like the same boxy, agricultural wagon that had been hauling camping gear for years. But under the engine lid, it was embracing a future of precision. This transition was a critical bridge that kept the Type 3 relevant as emissions regulations began to loom over the industry. It combined the unkillable bones of the air-cooled flat four with the sophisticated sleeper intelligence of a modern engine. It proved that Volkswagen wasn't just a one-trick pony relying on the ancient tech of the Beetle. They were capable of evolving their core philosophy into a platform that could support the complex, changing needs of a modernizing society. It was the moment the humble hauler gained a hidden layer of genius. It was the definitive proof that you could have the best of both worlds, the simplicity of the past and the precision of the future. Dismissing the 1965 variant as a relic misses its brilliance. It was the pinnacle of right-sized engineering. While modern SUVs isolate us with bloat, the variant offered honest, tactile capability. It didn't need massive horsepower to be a legend. It only needed the integrity to conquer the Alps. By solving the Beetle problem with its ingenious pancake engine, it democratized travel, transforming middle-class vacations from luxury into a right. It was a machine that humanized the road, proving that true adventure isn't measured in specs, but in resilience.